Before we get started today, everyone's just going to sort of introduce themselves, but since we're all here and we love listening to music and we love thinking about music and having all those virtual communities, please join me in giving an early sort of 10th anniversary congratulations to All Songs Considered, Bob Boilen. Today there's been a lot of talk about the financial issues. There's been lots of talk about property rights and privacy. One of the things that we're all really interested in at this table is the joy of music and the love of creating music and sharing it in so many different ways. Up here you've got reporters and critics and creators and musicians, and it's all about building a community. So I'm going to let the community speak for itself.
Thanks. So I'm Bob Boilen. I came to NPR 21 years ago. I came as a musician, as an artist, a creator, and with the hope of doing something to turn people on, as a lover of NPR, and hoping to turn people on to other artists and musicians. And so for 19 years, at All Things Considered, I produced music pieces on artists for the most part people didn't know, and that was my main mission in life, was to find people that I thought were interesting, that I thought others would want to hear, and get them on the air. And I did that for 19 years. And about 10 years ago, started a show called All Songs Considered with very much the same mission, to get music into the ears of people, music that wasn't being heard on radio, that was basically, for the most part, unless you lived in a few good cities, was failing most people. And so that, I felt, was the mission for me, was to make radio relevant for music and new music and unusual music. And I guess we'll move on and hear other stories, but that's the main reason I do what I do.
My name is Josh Jackson, and I like jazz. Yes, you all can join me in the AA meeting after this. I used to think it was a tremendous liability, actually, to love modern jazz, because there were so few outlets for it, and even in traditional terrestrial FM broadcasting, the majority of the music that I loved, that were my contemporaries and my peers, I heard it very rarely, and so I've sort of made it my little MO, I guess, to project the currency of the music and kind of remind people that it's an amazing and diverse art form, and it's played by people all around the world, and it actually still has some cultural cachet. You just haven't been able to see it, and so that's what I'm trying to do, both on NPR Music as a contributor from my member station, WBGO, and also where I host a show called The Checkout, which is a new music show for artists in New York, New Jersey metro area. So, I love the music, and it's plain and simple, and that's the reason why I'm trying to get it out to as many people who will listen to it. And I find that the newest medium for this service, the internet, is proving to be an effective way to reach audiences that I've been unable to reach with a transmitter on the tower.
My name's John Davis. I had the fortune of growing up here in Washington, D.C., and I'm a musician, and I guess I've been playing shows and such for 16 or 17 years now, and it's been something that's taken me all over the world, and also I've had the fortune of, I grew up in radio as well. My dad was a program director at a variety of sort of local radio stations. Some we're proud of, some we're not. And so I grew up around radio, so it's something, both playing music and being around radio are things that are really intertwined in my mind just throughout my whole life. And so for me, it was pretty natural when I got more involved in radio as well, because aside from being a musician, I started at college radio when I was in school at the University of Maryland, and I had a radio show at WMUC FM for several years. And about a year or two ago, I started a radio show on XM radio called 1, 2, 3, 4 More. It's just a show that really just focuses on the different kind of music I like punk rock and power pop and indie rock and all kinds of things. And when XM merged with Sirius, that sort of meant the end of that kind of programming on XM. So I moved over to WOXY, WOXY.com, and I've been able to continue to do that show with WOXY for the last probably about 8 months. And so it's just been interesting for me with so many years in playing music to now get a closer look at radio. And I also worked with Bob and Anya on a project at NPR that I think we're going to talk about in a little bit. One of my old bands called Georgie James did a thing called Project Song for them about 2 years ago, and I suppose we'll get to that. But yeah, that does it for me.
About 2 years ago, we launched NPR Music, and the idea was that there's so many people doing amazing things around music and public radio, but there's no one place to really see that shine in the internet space. And Bob's work with All Songs Considered was a real example of how if you do something really forward-looking and enterprising in the online space and try to build an audience around that, that can be really powerful. And we wanted to do that around not only indie rock or the genres, like rock genres, but also try that around jazz music and classical music and world music, and to see the whole breadth of what public radio does, and to create an inventive space where we could explore also what it means to program something across platforms, how you work with, so we've linked in with 12 stations to try to do programming with 12 stations. We're hooked into the news magazines at NPR. We feature all the things that are on all the news shows. We have 5 programs like Miriam McPartland Piano Jazz and World Cafe and so forth that are broadcast nationally. We house their websites, and we have a team here in Washington at the NPR headquarters who are creating the web version of NPR Music, which is really a multi-platform music exploration destination. And we've been having a lot of fun with it, and it's been growing, and it's been really amazing experience trying to think across platforms and think about how to frame the music experience and explore. I think what's also interesting is like there was a big arts journalism conference last weekend, and they were all like, so what does it mean to be a critic? You know, if you work for a paper, what does it mean to be a critic in the online space? And I would say, you know, I don't want to build those barriers. You know, we're trying to do reporting, criticism, curation, presenting, like all these things can live so well together and so fluidly in the online space, and that's what we're exploring.
And I'm a faculty member here, and as a professor, I can also say what I love about it is that you all have opened up a conversation. I mean, that's really what's happening in a lot of ways. Sometimes we think of the internet as being, oh, there's just so much out there and it's so chaotic, but what's been so helpful I've found with NPR Music is you have a place to go, and there is empty space. There is a place to think about ideas and have them expanded. And you all are also training the next generation. I mean, the internship program that you all have and the fact that these shows of what brought us all from very different fields together, I think is sort of an exciting thing. And sort of plans for the future, thoughts about what you all would like to see, where you'd like to see things go, or what you hope could maybe happen, given what your experience has been so far?
I'd actually go backwards just a little bit
Okay.
before we go forward, because I think one of the things that, starting a music web show 10 years ago, I got to think about was the amount of material that even in 1999 that was on the web, the amount of music that was on the web was overwhelming. And I think what all of us at NPR try to do is to try to but try to give you a reason to care about something. I would often bring music stories up as a director of All Things Considered, or just on the staff of All Things Considered, music I liked. And one of the things that always struck me is that because I liked something was never enough of a reason to do a radio story about it. I always started a radio story from the point of view of they're not going to like this music. And if you do that, then you give people a reason to come to like it. So if you do a story on Congotronics, you know, the electronic music that was that's made in the Congo with the African thumb pianos, you know, someone will hear that on the radio. Unlike reading it in Rolling Stone, they'll hear it on the radio, and they're going to like it or they're not going to like it. You can't make them like it or not like it. But what you can do is give it context and show that there's an interesting story, try to help them understand why this stuff is fascinating. And then at least they walk away from it with the idea of, oh, you know, that's really ugly music, but I understand it, I get it. I get what it means to the culture. I get what it means to the people making it. And so when we started something like All Things Considered, and when we do NPR Music, I think what we all try to bring to the table is that, why is this worth caring about? Because we're trying to turn you onto something that we see value in, but it's not important that we see value in it. If you don't find the value in it, it's worthless. So I think in all of our curation, and that's what I think of what All Songs is a curatorial show where, you know, I go through a stack every week of, you know, 100, 150 CDs. I find 6, and that's enough. And it's enough, you know, just to find 6 things that I love to put out there, and give it some context. And I think, you know, Josh does that with his jazz show, and we can talk soon about Project Song and why we do stuff like that, why we try to show the creative process. But I think that's the bigger point, is to give context to what we do.
Yeah, I would also say, I would second what you said, Bob, and I would also say that for jazz, what the web allows us to do for, say, a series like Live at the Village Vanguard. With Live at the Village Vanguard, we're broadcasting live in New York on WBGO. We're sending the audio feed to DC so that it can be streamed on the NPR Music site. We hang a camera inside the club, and we run our stereo mix into Livestream, actually, which is one of the sponsors, I think. We do a live video stream, and sometimes we actually have more people who are watching the Village Vanguard concert unfold than there are spaces in the club. I mean, it's a club of 123 people. So what we're attempting to do with, you know, the video, kind of giving that angle of jazz performance, and also with a live chat, we do that, is we're essentially attempting to, you know, lower the barrier of entry for jazz, because I think that it's been prohibitive for a very long time. And so that's what my hope ultimately is for a series like Live at the Village Vanguard, is that, you know, it's easy to come to and check it out, basically. And so I might make you a jazz fan. Be careful.
Is it okay if I do some questions? I know we'd said we wanted to take questions early on. Are there any questions out? We thought we'd let you guys spark the conversation. Any questions? Anybody? Oh, well, now, okay, here we go. We've got one right down here. We just wait. We've got a mic coming. Here you go, other side. So sorry.
Well, Anya, hi, I'm Jason, and I really like what you guys are doing with NPR Music, and it's a really neat collaborative platform. I'm wondering, you know, you mentioned that there are 12 stations involved, and what's the criteria for a participating station? Who kind of decides, like, in terms of quality and quantity of content? And then what role do the stations play in kind of creating this online platform? I guess you're talking about kind of sending the feed on down to DC, and then people in DC, I guess, put together the criticism and determine how it's presented online. How much does the station that produced this content to begin with play a role in how it ends up on NPR Music site?
We work with 12 stations, and we basically started out by looking at some of the most active public radio music stations around the country. A lot of people who were doing original content creation, presenting live music, interacting with musicians in a really substantial, meaningful way. So we pretty much so far stayed with those 12. And because one of the reasons is that at first I think we thought NPR Music would be more of an a place for pure aggregation, which is like all these people would send us all this stuff and we'll put it up. And then we quickly realized that this is actually its own programming space, and that just putting things that you did in another medium and just sticking it on the web and expecting people to come there is not the most useful, fruitful thing that you can do. So what we've been exploring over the last 2 years is, what does it mean to present something online? How do you connect with audiences online? How do you connect? We've been doing these tiny desk concerts, videos at Bob's desk. Basically, we are sort of we see ourselves as sort of a hothouse for figuring this stuff out about how to interact with music and musicians and the audience in the online space. And so we're learning together. And so with the stations, we want to be able to highlight some of the best curators and voices out there in the public radio sphere, and so Josh is one of those people. And so Josh will write the text, or we have a collaborator, a jazz collaborator for Josh on our staff who does a blog supreme, and because we really think it really became obvious. We have these incredible archives, we have this incredible resource that public radio has created over decades. But it needs a voice, it needs a conversation, it needs a spark around it, and that's really what we're trying to do. And so with the stations, we work very carefully, because I knew early on also that you have 12 stations, you just can't send a whole bunch of stuff over the wall and think it's all going to stick. So what we want to do is we're creating very special streams of programming that we do with stations and curating specifically for the web. So it changes. We started doing streams together. We did something called like the Makeout Mix for Valentine's Day. Every station sent us 10 love songs, and we put it together, multi-genre. I mean, we're just trying, and that was very popular. We've been doing audiences polling, and then we create streams out of that. We tried Josh came to us with the idea for Live with the Village Vanguard, and so we've been exploring. We didn't start with video. We added that. We added the conversation and the chat, and we're going to create, widgets so that any station across the entire country can actually recreate that live experience on their own site and promote it on their air. So we're also thinking about creating really discrete programming on our site for the web that we can also then distribute out, like NPR distributes Morning Edition. Well, we're creating like web shows that can be distributed across public radio online. So it's we have monthly calls with stations, and it's a very collaborative process.
And if I can just say one thing too, if you were to study NPR, the other thing they've done is across the demographics, it's transgenerational. It's not like, oh, you're just trying to reach out and get the young audience. I mean, audiences are listening. People who maybe wouldn't have listened to jazz or indie rock are actually listening because they got to know NPR, and vice versa. There's a lot of youth who are finding NPR through NPR radio. NPR music, who maybe aren't tuning in to the radio station per se. So. Is there another question? Yeah, we've got one right over here in the nice coral shirt. Right there, yeah.
Hi, Trevor Golding, GW Law School student. Just wondering, all the discussion about turning folks onto perhaps somewhat obscure genres, does anyone have any success stories to share about how they've been able to actually drive success for individual artists, whether that be touring or just record sales? Any feedback you might have heard from artists that you featured?
What about Monument? That's you.
Yeah, I think that could apply to what Project Song, which was the project that my old band Georgie James was involved in with NPR, which was maybe you should.
The quick and dirty is the idea is we take artists, we put them in a studio for 2 days. I lay a series of cards on a table that are words and a series of photographs. They have to pick a word in a photograph, and then within 2 days, they have to write a song about that word and that picture, and then we document the whole process. And
video,
audio, it becomes a radio piece. The reason to do this stuff is not just to make bands break up like we did with Georgie James, but
that's what happens. You saw it all.
But it's such a good story.
But the reason to do this is because over and over again, after doing music pieces and music pieces, you see bands coming in and doing sort of the same shtick, the same routine. They come in with this beautiful studio at NPR, and they basically try and recreate the album that they made 6 months ago, you know, and they're not going to do that. So you don't get quite the album, you don't get quite you get something different, and it doesn't always have spark. So that was the reason to do something like Project Song. Anya mentioned, and we'll get there in a second, and Anya mentioned concerts at my desk. We have this gorgeous studio in NPR, beautiful, you know, multi-track studio, and we take musicians and put them behind my desk, and we get them and we videotape it. And the reason to do stuff like that is you push the artists in directions they wouldn't normally go. You put them in a space that they're, you know, it's uncomfortable in a way because you're, you know, Tom Jones played at my desk. He's 5 feet away from, you know, people sitting right there. He's got no microphone to hold on to. There's just one stereo mic picking up everything. There's no lighting. There's nothing between him and the audience. He was perspiring like mad, nervous as hell, and he gave an amazing performance. And that happens with bands who can't bring their electric guitars, they can't bring their drum kits. Everybody manages, and so you get something different. And with you guys,
Yeah, I mean, I thought that when we were approached with the idea, the concept was kind of more, I thought it was sort of like a window into what it means to write a song. And my partner in the band at the time, I mean, I think her take on it was like, this will be great. You know, this is just, you know, this is going to be a really good opportunity. And for me, I thought I would never, ever want anyone to hear a piece of music I've written after only 2 days. I mean, generally it takes, for me at least, months to sort of, I don't know, groom the song or whatever till it gets to the point that I'm happy to have people hear it. And so my initial reaction was no, but you know, shortly I thought, no, this is cool, this is a challenge, this is something, but it was a very unnatural experience to be put into what is essentially a reality show. I mean, that was the closest I've ever come to being on reality television. Thanks, Bob.
I'm really, really sorry.
And but you wound up with this really unique sort of result, which is what I thought was cool about the program. And to go back to your question originally, which is, I mean, I think that, you know, Georgie James, I saw for us things change after we did that we reached people who certainly would have had no idea of who we were or what our music was like. And you know, that is the point of like we're talking about, of programs like All Songs Considered, or things like Project Song, or like the radio show that I do on WOXY. I mean, the idea is to give people something different. And Project Song is certainly, and what is done at NPR is certainly something different than what's going on with commercial radio.
Also got, you know, nominated for an Emmy Award, a National Emmy Award, so people got to see you that way too.
Yes, that too. I mean, that was definitely just something we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what it was going to be like, but it was a unique, slightly unnatural experience.
I mean, we simply, take more questions, but we simply will play a song on All Songs Considered, you know, one of the 6 every week for the last 10 years, and I'll go see that band in concert, and their audience changes from the moment we play that song to the moment, you know, it's a turning point for them, and it's heartwarming that's true. Somebody
Yep,
pick.
so you've got, Mike, you've got someone right there. Just, yeah.
That ties in well to the question I was going to ask. My name's Tom. I'm a musician in DC, but I'm also a music fan. And at some point, Billboard, I think 2 weeks ago, had a list of the 100 things that an artist could do or a label could do to get a song exposure. And NPR, I think, had 3 or 2 or 3 or 4 of the top 100 for exposure to a mass audience. And obviously the landscape has changed. So I'm curious just to get NPR's opinion on where they think they stand and how you gauge yourself. Are you a music tastemaker, a critic? And where do you feel that NPR fits in that landscape? Because I think you've been bestowed with a powerful way to help promote music, and it's great. It's great that it's in our backyard in DC. Curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I'll start, which is that even, you know, 10, 15 years ago, getting a CD by somebody, you knew that holding that CD was somebody's life, that they worked really hard, they spent their grandmother's inheritance, they sold their second mortgage on their house, You know, this is when CDs and going in the studios was really expensive. You knew that, regardless of money even, that their heart was in this. And you knew that, I knew when I listened to it and I just said, I don't like this, and I put it aside, that, you know, that changed somebody's life by not picking it as well as by picking it. But you can't, it's really hard to, because we get, you know, a couple hundred every week, and you can't think that for every CD, but in the back of my mind, I know that that's true. That said, I have to pick something that I believe in. I have to pick something that I love, and if it becomes well-known because of it, great, you know, but I don't do any of that for any of that, you know what I mean? I don't pick something because I'm gonna make it famous. I just don't care about that stuff. I'm a music fan, I get music that I like, and I pass it along, and what happens to it, happens to it. That line between critic and fan for me is I mean, when I was working on All Things Considered, I'm a journalist, you know, and so I try to get all my facts straight. I try to make sure everything is right. If I pass a story on to a host, I try to inform them about why this stuff is important, and so they ask the right question of the artist. But on All Songs Considered, it's a much fuzzier line. You can hear me doing a concert from the 930 Club, a place that, you know, I played at the first day they ever opened their doors, you know. I've been there, I've been on that stage, and I come as an announcer to those shows as a music fan, straight out. And if I'm not, you know, if that show is great, you hear my voice, and I'm excited about it. And if it wasn't so great, you hear that too. So just, I think being straight up and honest, I think, is across the board what we go for, and so there is that fuzzy line between journalism, critic, and curator.
I mean,
Josh?
it's-
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as it relates to jazz, which is virtually all I know about, actually, I think that this portal, if you want to, you know, call it that, although it's much more of NPR music, is actually started to radically transform, actually, jazz musicians, especially those under 40 years old. And it's given me an opportunity to actually have some very serious discussions with many of the musicians that I've worked with throughout my career in terms of, well, what are you going to do? I mean, all the questions that musicians are here at this conference for. Well, you know, the thing is, jazz is very much an indie community, and, you know, it's been sort of like, you know, the bottom of the shoe of the record business for quite a long time. And so what I've found is that the musicians who are playing jazz on a nightly basis and making their own recordings have not had a place to get the word out, so to speak. And so what NPR has allowed me to do as a contributor is to lend an editorial voice in terms of the musicians that are selected. And it's also had a way to change the culture of the musicians themselves because they haven't been thinking in the same way that the indie rock community, say, has been thinking for more than 10 years. And so, you know, we're finally getting the message, basically. And we're trying to find some creative solutions in jazz, and I think that NPR has been very beneficial in terms of putting it in front of people.
Well, I mean, I guess I was going to say that the problem with traditional radio is when you listen to it, or when I listen to it, I feel that they don't care, you know, that it's just sort of like, that it was, you know, randomly programmed by a computer, which in many ways it is. And so in terms of NPR being, you know, having 3 or 4 of those spots on that, you know, 100 ways, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's like, and NPR and All Songs Considered is a model for other radio stations, and you know, we can only hope it's followed, but I don't know. You know?
Okay. Questions?
And to also, I'm sorry, to also very quickly put this in perspective, where I sit at a radio station, is that right now you have to understand that the FM transmitter is still our greatest asset, strangely enough. And so, you know, at the station level, you know, we're kind of like one level below NPR, as the production house. But at the station level, you know, we're very much spending a lot of time working with the very modest resources that we have in public radio in terms of financial resources. We have plenty of talent, but we're trying to figure out a way to make the convergence happen, because I understand that in the next 20 years this is not going to be the case, where the transmitter is going to be number one. So we're trying to manage a pretty rocky course right now at the station level. So it's an interesting time for us as well.
Okay, we've got some more questions. I see a question right down here on front, and while you're getting down there, I'll just add the comment that as a listener, you do get the sense, not so much someone saying, this is good for you like broccoli, you should really listen to it, but instead saying, this is so cool, just listen. And I think the excitement that comes across in NPR is one of the things that builds that community of listeners.
Hi, I'm David Baskin, and as one of my gigs, I'm very proud to have a show on Jazz FM 91, which is Canada's only all-jazz station. And
Say hello to Ross.
I will indeed. I can't really do Ross's voice, but I'll try. In any event, there are so few all-jazz stations. We're very proud to do what we do. I have so much fun because I get to pick all the songs on my own show, and that's very special. Can you tell us something about what NPR is doing in terms of international, both in terms of getting its programs out to other national, both public and private stations? We're a community-owned and community-supported station. The CBC is a public broadcaster, so we're sort of cousins. But can you tell us what you're doing to get NPR programming out to similar broadcasters, and similarly, what opportunities there are for foreign broadcasters to get their programming into NPR?
Anya, you want to take that one?
There's a lot of rights issues around doing international music programming, so it's a bit of a challenge, I would say. So, we're happy to think about it and explore it, but when we source license a lot of almost everything we present on NPR Music is source licensed to one degree or another. So there's a lot of hand holding with record companies and musicians to make sure that we have the permission, and so in some cases we do have broader rights, but it's challenging.
Another challenge, if I can just step in, and we've talked about this before, is also genre. I mean, Anya, if you want to talk about, you had mentioned unionized groups like orchestras. It's very different to get rights to orchestra as opposed.
We're looking at, every kind of group of musicians has different issues in terms of getting rights, and I think that's one of the challenges, that the more, with classical music and orchestras have a whole infrastructure around rights and unions and so forth, and it makes, that has its own particular challenge, and the jazz world has its own issues, and, we are lucky in some ways to be in at the burgeoning of the sort of indie rock craze that started happening around when Bob started All Songs Considered, that it allowed us a lot of freedom to experiment and explore, which we're taking now to the other genres and engaging with musicians on that level. So I mean, we want to be able to share our love and enthusiasm for all kinds of music, and that's what we really strive to do. And we will, turn over large boulders to do so.
And we certainly get a lot of people. I mean, this isn't an effort, a particular effort, but when we do a concert from the 930 Club, there are people partying in offices in Australia, I mean, we get, because we open these chat rooms up and we just see that, there's people from all over the world hearing this. And I think one of the things that is a recurring theme that hasn't really been mentioned, and this goes to the stuff that Josh does and all of what NPR Music does, is and the 12 partner stations, that it frees it from the geography. In other words, this great talent somewhere in Boston. Well, that's nice if you live in Boston, but now that's not true anymore, And I think the same thing with, the bands we do at the 930 Club or the Rock and Roll Hotel or Black Cat or whatever it is. They don't come to every town, and when they do, they sell out. So it gives. If you live in a small town or even a big city, there's a good chance that you may not get to see the group that we're webcasting. There's a good chance that you may hear them and love them and want to go see them. There's a chance that you'll never go see them because you live in Barrow, Alaska. And so I think we free the music of geography, which I think is really important. It's really, it's always been a crime that so many great shows happen, in cities. Well, we're fortunate in Washington, there's a lot of good shows. In this space right here, I walked in this space, I hadn't been here in ages, and thought, God, Talking Heads, Devo, and Per Ubu right in this room, in 1978. It was amazing shows, And so we're lucky that we've been able to live through in big cities and see that stuff. And I think what NPR Music does is it gets it out to, a larger audience.
Another question? We've got one right here.
Hi, I'm Tom Carrico, artist manager here in DC for a band called Chop Teeth, 14-piece Afro-funk big band. And
Good band.
we've benefited, thank you very much, Bob and Anya, for the feature and the airplay. I'm curious, it would appear that you have no boundaries as to what you hear that comes in through the mailbox. Right around the time I met Bob, we happened to contract with a big PR firm that I know sends you stuff all the time, and I'm curious, do you have gatekeepers who listen ahead of you, or does literally everything that comes to you in the mail for all three of the programmers?
I would say it's not a centralized. That's not really centralized. I mean, Bob
It's a nightmare for people to figure out who
Right,
gets
exactly.
what in our building. But anyway, go on.
We have a team of crazy music lovers who do NPR Music, and they all, sift through all the CDs. But, there are many ways that we featured something. The production assistant on All Things Considered can also pitch something to All Things Considered, and it'll make it there. And, every level, a host, Robert Siegel will want to do something with a wonderful harpist or something, and that will get on, and it was a big tent. And we also have the stations we're working with who are also curating. I mean, Josh sends us some things that, we may not have heard of. And so what we do is we count on the sort of curators around public radio, the music lovers at every platform, to contribute. And we honor those because that's the best thing that we can do is sort of honor the taste. Because I really want to have a broad tent. I want to be genre agnostic. I want to have great music there all the time. And I want to have people excited about it. I mean, that's the key. And you should see the excitement in the room when we've got great music going. I mean, that's the fun part of it. And so we allow a lot of people to be those gatekeepers.
And Josh can talk about his process, but the only gatekeeper is the intern we have who takes all the stuff out of the packaging. And my instruction is all of the press releases that there might be, they go in the recycle bin, and all the CD goes in a mail bin faced in one direction, so I can just read them. And I just pick them up, and I rarely will look at what I'm about to listen to and just start listening. If I like what I'm hearing, then I'll spend some time. Of course, there's things, where people say, here, this is great, around the office, because we're all music lovers. Have you heard this? Have you heard that? There's that conversation. But for me, it's really important for me to come to it on my own terms. And that way our show's not a trendy show, we're not doing what everyone else does. But then again, you take a group like, I just saw there's a new Vampire Weekend song that just came out, so I'll think about Vampire Weekend as trendy thing. We put that on our show the moment I heard it because I loved it. Now, it was also somewhere else and somewhere else and somewhere, it was everywhere because people liked it. And so what people mistake sometimes for hype is sometimes just something people get excited about. It's easy to confuse the two.
Another question? What about, let's go in the back. We've got some folks way in the back there. There was someone with their hand up. There we go.
I'm doing good. Hi. Do you find that you're indirectly influencing certain markets? I know that I live in Los Angeles, and Morning Becomes Eclectic was like cult with Nick Harcourt, and it caused like this whole huge phenomenon with Hotel Cafe in terms of booking and getting people to the shows. Do you find that in other markets as well, or is that just like a one-off kind of thing?
I mean, KCRW is a fantastic station in Los Angeles, and they've really managed to create a community around the kind of music that they stand for, and more power to them. I think KEXP is a really strong station. The Current in Minnesota, WXPN in Philadelphia, KUT in Austin. These stations who have really managed to find the niche that they can really serve and explore. I think that's what's really exciting about all these folks around the country having their own venues to explore that opportunity. I don't know if that answered your question, but we found that if you find the right, if you find the right formula for exploring the music that you love and you connect with an audience, it can work in an online space like with All Songs Considered, and in the radio like Morning Becomes Eclectic.
Another question? We got one right down here. I'm giving her a workout back and forth, back and forth.
Full disclosure, former NPR person here.
Yeah.
Hey, Rick.
They turned the mic off.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Big voice.
Just like being back in Studio 4B again. I wanted to know, kind of following up on something that Josh said, the stick, the transmitter is still, radio is still the medium that you can use anywhere. I mean, I love my iPhone, but streaming music over AT&T on this thing is just awful. So I can turn on an FM radio anywhere I want to go. And so I want to know two things about the system since I've been out of NPR for a while. First of all, it seemed it was the trend a few years ago that more and more member stations were cutting back on music programming. Is that still going on? And secondly, has HD radio made any dent at all in sort of pushing back against that? Because now you have these multiple carriers on a single frequency.
I'll take your second question first. HD radio, you can buy the funerary stone for it. Seriously, HD radio is dead, and you won't just hear that from me, but you'll hear that from major researchers in and out of public radio.
But if you have one, you'll find a lot of cool programming. It's true. I mean, a lot of stations are multicasting and doing really interesting things on their secondary
and
channels.
WBGO is going to start a secondary stream in March of 2010, and we're actually feeding both things. We're feeding our HD format, but we don't really care as much about, and we're actually feeding online, which we're going to build apps for, which we're actually going to get probably more people streaming the secondary service online than are actually listening to HD in the footprint of New York. And this is with billions of dollars of free advertising. Billions of dollars of free advertising. I'm sorry, what was your first question about whether music?
Are member stations still kind of cutting back on music?
There are 6 full-time jazz stations in the system. 6 of them. WBGO is one of them. And this is why I always thought my love for the music was a sort of liability, in fact, because throughout the spectrum of public radio, the system itself, the hundreds and hundreds of stations, it's all migrated more and more to a news talk format. And so that has been to the detriment very much of music programming. That being said, the strongest will survive. I do believe that. And ultimately what this is about is, can you create compelling content and can you create high quality content? And I defy you to listen to any of the Village Vanguard recordings and not tell me that they are beautifully recorded. These are made by people who care about music. And I think that feeling itself transmits subconsciously in a lot of the things that we do, both at WBGO and also at NPR Music.
Well, I have been given the time's up sign. But before I do that, because I just can't cut these guys off, could you each just give us a sort of final comment or word? You want to start with Anya? And if you have one parting thought for us in 20 words or less.
Thank you for having us.
John?
I guess, well, no.
Can I take back my...
Yeah.
I want to thank Amy Schriefer, who's in the audience, who's our product manager for NPR Music, is she there? She's fantastic, and she's really helped us learn how to do things well on the web in the last year that she's been here. She's the reason we're all here today, too.
I mean, I think the point of why we're all here is that we care about these things, and we care about radio still, and the best radio spreads good ideas and spreads inspiration and things like that, and that's why we're here, and that's what NPR is doing, I think.
Jazz isn't dead. It doesn't even smell funny, and I predict, if I have my way and my energy, that you're going to be hearing and seeing more jazz with a sense of currency, both on WBGO and NPR Music.
And I think, for that. I think the future of music is filled with a lot of hope and really good musicians and great stuff, and it's wide open. So many people are making music, and the stuff I'm getting is so interesting, and it's such a great future.
And let's all go and hear Bonorama tonight and have a great time.